you so much. Matthew and Sabine, thank you. Thank you so much. What a sweet song to get us started today. You know, it was about 28 years ago that I first walked in to a Unity church. I was in my 20s as a young woman, and I'd been out church shopping, you know, and I'd sat out there in a lot of different churches, and I'd sit there and I'd go, I just don't think that's right. And then my girlfriend Jill, my new friend, introduced me to Unity. She invited me to go to church with her. She grew up in Unity, her parents grew up in Unity, and her grandparents were even a part of Unity, I believe, out at Unity Village back in the day when the Fillmores were here. So huge tradition in that family of Unity. And I'm so delighted that she invited me. You know, it was a simple thing. From the minute I walked in the door, I knew that there was something powerful going on within me. You know, I'd been out searching. And from the minute I sat down, I felt the energy of the church. I heard the music and the meditation. And then there was even a female minister giving a talk. Yeah, how about that? I was in awe. There was not it's not something that I had seen before. And so as I sat there, my head started to nod as I heard the message through the weeks that I continued to go to church. And it was nodding continually, kind of like one of those little bobblehead dolls, you know? So, and I continued to nod to Unity today. So I wanted to share something with you about my journey. There are a lot of reasons that I'm still involved, but there's sort of three main reasons that I picked out that it's always been a match for me. It started me on my journey, and it's continuing to I'm still in that journey. We still continue to grow. And so the first one I already mentioned was just really about energy. You know, from the minute you walk in the church, even if I'm in a good place when I walk in, I'm in a higher energetic level when I leave the church. So that's probably the first place I want to start, is talking about energy. And I think that's derived from actually this feeling of goodness that we feel in Unity. Principle one, I wanted to review some of the principles today. It's always worth talking about. Principle one is God is absolute good, everywhere present. He was a young woman in a Christian culture. I had grown up with this idea that there was some kind of duality going on in the world, like there was good and evil, and I never really bought into that. So when I walked into Unity and I heard, well, God is good, and there's this one energetic presence that is guiding and directing everything, I think it's connected to evolution. I was excited. It was something that immediately that I could connect with. The second principle also addresses human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ spirit within. They're very essences of God, and therefore they are also inherently good. And so not only is God good, but I'm good, and you're good, we're good people. And you know, this is probably really not, it is not traditional Christianity, and so I really want to point out how Unity is different. In my early days, you know, I was hearing a lot about this word sin when I walked into churches. You know, that was like the exit out the door. I don't know if the same is true for any of you. It was a relief to me in my first church with Reverend Mary Umwake for me to sit and listen to the fact that, you know, sin is just a mistake. It's just missing the mark. You know, we're human beings, and we can make that mistake. So suddenly there was this liberation, I think, about the idea of even what that meant in a Christian culture. I've had to do a lot of relanguaging of Christian terms. I think Unity is very good at doing that. Before I move on from that, I also want to mention this idea of, you know, evil in the world. I don't necessarily believe in that. I believe that all people are good, and I believe that we can make mistakes, even mistakes that are harmful enough that we harm ourselves or harm other people. And again, I think that's just a mixed direction. That's human nature. It is not from another source that's evil. It's about, I believe, humans not getting the love that they needed when they were children. As a parent, I see how much our children need love. The psychologists say from birth to 5 years, the most important years that we can give love to people. What would happen in the world if all people that age got surrounded in love? Don't you think that we would see less violence in the world today? Yes, absolutely. So then the second area is empowerment. And this is shown in principle 3. Human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thinking. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in thought. And again, this is all about unity. We're all about thinking, or thinking mind, and what we're going to do with our thinking mind to create the life that we want to live. The next one is principle 4. Prayer is creative thinking that heightens the connection with God mind and therefore brings forth wisdom, healing, prosperity, and everything good. Again, it's our choice to connect with Spirit and Source in some way through prayer and meditation. We are empowered to do that. And then the 5th one, knowing and understanding the laws of life, also called truth, are not enough. A person must also live the truth that he or she knows. And again, this is our place of power. We get to decide what to do with the things that we have learned, especially around what we've learned with our thinking. I actually think in this day and age, it is our sacred responsibility for each one of us to be putting into action what we have learned here in this church. I also appreciate the energy of healing and wholeness. Unity recognizes that as humans, at times, we do need to do work to heal ourselves. Now, even in that healing space, we may feel broken, but our divine nature is most certainly whole. I think back to that time when I walked into that church. I was about 26, and I didn't know at the time that I had healing work to do. I had no idea. After 6 months listening to Mary Wake, I found out that I had some forgiveness work to do with my mom. My mom had an issue with alcohol, and I had been looking at that age all about what she had done. And after listening to Mary Wake, it rechanneled the direction of my thinking and what I needed to look at, which was to quit looking out there and turn the direction in here to me. And it was such a healing place. I also remember at that particular church there was a group of Al-Anon. I got involved in that, participated in for quite a long time, practicing those principles, 12-step principles. Unity, and that was also in the Unity Church. Unity has a unique way of creating sacred space to heal. And I know that all the work that I have done to heal, has not been done alone, folks. I really believe this. Healing work requires a community. It certainly does. So please be open to that. If you feel that you're in a place in your life that you need to heal, be open about that and share it with us. And certainly we can be in a place to provide support for you. Another area that's really powerful for me in Unity is all about, honoring others. This is honoring all aspects of people, but most, and particularly religion in and of itself and spirituality. Unity is unique in the fact that we'd like to know that there are all kinds of different spiritual paths, and we even invite those spiritual paths into our services. I've heard a lot of Hindu things and Buddhist things. We want to explore. I think that's exciting. So so this is not a place of conflict for us. This is a place of power when we can honor people. I actually think that, Unity has an ability to create loving global community, which is certainly something that the world needs right now. So I'm reviewing a bit here. This is my energy list. Goodness, empowerment, healing and wholeness, and honoring others. Okay, so I'm still nodding. I wonder if any of you are nodding to this. There's a few. Okay, there's a few bobbleheads in the audience, yes. Okay, and the great thing about Unity is, we're open for our own interpretation. We're open to believe. Okay, another area that I wanted to share about that I think is foundational for me. I had a lot of questions about the Bible and Jesus, mostly because I didn't grow up with it. I'd heard a lot of stuff in Christian community. I was just kind of curious about, what people were doing. A lot of it didn't sound good to me. So to find an avenue, a place where it did resonate with me was like, wow, this is interesting. Can't be in Unity long without hearing about metaphysical Bible interpretation, and particularly, let me back up. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, our founders. Charles Fillmore spent his life looking at doing metaphysical Bible interpretation, which I'll share more about. These are his resources, the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, the Revealing Word. These are sources where he looked at people, places, and things in the Bible as a journey of human consciousness. And so he left a lot of research for us. But again, he was the first person to say, this is what I think about this. He would then turn it to you and say, what do you think about this? So that really places Unity within a Protestant area of religion. We're free to interpret for ourselves. I think that's important to know. Back again, this is Charles Fillmore's words when he was talking about metaphysical Bible interpretation. He said, the Bible is a recital, I love that word, of what has taken place in the consciousness of man, of the result of his working, either intelligently with the law or intelligently against it in seeking his own salvation. It gives an explanation of spiritual law as applied to man and tells how to find the kingdom of heaven within. Again, Charles Fillmore was all about the power of the mind, and he was all about discovering God within. If you like something a little bit simpler to comprehend, I like Reverend Tony Bame's definition. She talks about when people start to do metaphysical Bible interpretation, she says, we begin to ask ourselves ask questions that are about looking beyond the reality in front of our eyes and desire to see how the story can impact the process of our unfolding spiritual awareness. Now, I also have to share, I've had some students of mine that have shared, Shawn, I think the metaphysical Bible interpretation is really cool, but I don't really want to sit around and do it. And I'm like, well, that's okay. I'm not telling you have to do that, but I am requesting that you look at your own thoughts in the world and what you're thinking today and what you really actually want to be thinking, because that's the place of power. And if you could do that, then you've certainly got a long space of being here engaged in unity. I did want to point out one more thing. If you're new to metaphysics, this is an example from Charles Fillmore in The Revealing Word. And he was talking about thoughts, and he's using example of sheep and goats. Again, I said people, places, and things are what we look at in relationship to the consciousness journey. So he says the separation of goats from sheep is a mental process wherein the good, obedient, and profitable thoughts, sheep, are retained. The stubborn, selfish, useless thoughts, goats, are put away. So isn't this what we do in unity? We're shifting that from that lower energy thought to a higher energy thought. So how many of you maybe had a lower energy thought this morning? Yeah. Yeah, yes. But more, okay, that's human. So more importantly, were you able to recognize it? That's consciousness. And then were you able to create a shift to something different? Okay, so I'm seeing head shake, nodding, yes. Yes. Another key aspect for me was the 12 powers. I'd heard things about the disciples and the Ming followers of Jesus, and I think historically, I think that that's interesting, and yet this was far more interesting to me, the idea that instead of the 12 disciples, those become the 12 disciplines that exist within me to cultivate and to grow. And they're listed there. We could talk about the 12 powers all the time, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. If you're not familiar with what they are, then you may want to do some research to read a book about them. Okay, so, if we're doing metaphysics, then the question is, what do we do with this guy, Jesus? And I guess I have to admit, even today, I'm a minister, and there are times do I really have to talk about Jesus today? There's this energy that's like, do I really want to go there? And yet, because that's not my norm, I'll let you know that, and yet I'm starting with it. It's not my norm, but yet there's a foundation piece of this that I think is important for you to know where I come from with this. I do think that he was a real man. I do believe that he lived 2,000 years ago. Our calendar is designed around that. I do think that he was a huge example of consciousness in the world. He was connected to spirit in a really, really huge way. The thing I love about unity is that we recognize Jesus as a teacher. He was a teacher. He was our first minister. He's showing us how to connect with spirit and to live that life. So I wanted to point out a few of the ways that he was teaching. And this is my acronym. He gave us a MAP, M-A-P-P, which is, he taught in miracles, he taught in action, he taught in precepts, and he taught in parables. So let's talk about miracles. A demonstration of divine law, usually resulting in an increase of faith by the witness. So we've heard a lot of these stories through our culture. An example of one of those might be walking on water. So if you actually saw that, it wasn't magic, and it was a real act of walking on water, then you would have an increase in faith. Another one is he taught by action. He was a role model, and often actions were symbolic in nature. So an example of that is washing the disciples' feet. And that is, again, open to interpretation. Why did he do that? I would say that, he had people that were idolizing him, and then he was actually then becoming subservient to them. And I think he was trying to create more of an equal relationship. He was all about equality. He didn't think he was up there and people were down here. It was about, being at this space together. And then precepts, a statement of spiritual truth, such as, I'm sure many of you have heard this, I'm the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I am them bear much fruit. And again, it's to make a point. He's telling a story. Because remember, back then, in those days, they didn't have television, they didn't have books. Most people didn't read. The entertainment was the storytellers. And so this is a story, and he's sharing the idea that the vine is the main part of the plant, and then the branches out, which would be us, and that's exactly what bears fruit. Therefore, if we're the branch, we need to connect with source to produce in our life. And then the last one, parables. That's an earthly story with heavenly meaning. An example of this is about the pearl. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. And bottom line, there's a reference here to the fact if we really touch the divine of spirit, then we're going to know that that is far more valuable than any material possession could possibly be. So why am I bringing this up? Jesus was demonstrating at all times how to be more conscious in the world through his actions and through his stories. He was kind of laying the map. And then this was a light bulb moment for me when I realized this in ministerial school. I don't know that this is being taught in most Unity churches. I hope it is today. But I really believe that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, are really an example of it's sharing the unfolding journey of consciousness. We're born unconscious, and then we become, in our own growth, conscious. And then the New Testament is actually about, we are conscious people. How do we grow to be super conscious? And you'll notice that the New Testament is a lot about Jesus, and that was his journey. So we're hearing about it. If you can remember this, connected with Unity, and share it with other people, I think it will really help a lot of people if you're a real serious student in studying. So then that leads us right to the conversation about consciousness. When I'm researching online, there are like 20,000 papers on consciousness, and yet theologians and philosophers say that we know so little about what exactly this means. But I do want to mention the definition from Webster. It's a function of the brain. And Webster defines it as the fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. So, I hear that, and yet I'm like, it's almost easier to say what consciousness is not, rather than what it is, and leave it to, you guys like Deepak Chopra? I love his work, and this is his book, The Healing Self, and he created a little list, and this is sort of like some of the ways that we are conscious in our daily life here and now. We eat irregularly, or we're on the run. You listen to your spouse and kids without really listening. You react negatively towards someone without examining why this is necessary or right. You don't notice anything beautiful about the entire day. You are haunted by something painful from your past. You feel insecure or unsafe. You lash out at a friend without thinking. You might play the victim. You feel to stand up for yourself, or maybe you're like a people pleaser. You go along to get along. I read that list and I think of, in times in my life when I could have been that in a certain day, and yet again, we are empowered to shift from that place when we realize that we're in that place and move on to something different. And Unity can certainly support us in that. Now, to further explain consciousness, I did find a little short video on YouTube. It's about 2 minutes, so I wanted to share this with you. It has kind of a unique British voice person.
There is the age-old saying that ignorance is bliss. It suggests that if you do not know something, then you will not worry about it. But in terms of dealing with life this concept is not possible for a human being to maintain. Complete ignorance may in fact be blissful, but we as humans have surpassed the ability to be of the complete ignorance required for such bliss. Through evolution, we have come into higher and complex consciousness. We have come to be inquisitive and analytical about the life around us. We are the manifestations of nature's attempt to reflexively comprehend itself. No human is exempt from this, and therefore no human can possess the bliss associated with ignorance. Less cognizant beings like that of an insect or a reptile can possibly abide by such a concept, but we are no longer on the same cognitive field as an insect or reptile, so we cannot live like one. Therefore, we must not buy into the easiness or superficiality of human idiocy, for we are all of an intelligence that requires attention and embracement. You must work to achieve your highest intellectual capacity and resist being pulled down and diverted away from caring about the power of your mind. The pursuit of higher awareness and intelligence is the pursuit of humanity itself. And if you wish to be in touch with your humanity, you must not neglect what makes you uniquely human, your ability to ask why and work and fight for answers. When we ignore this pursuit and neglect an attempt to understand our being and the life around it, we endure unawareness and lose all chances of ever truly experiencing bliss.
So I love the way that he was speaking to what exactly it is, and I'm thinking that we can continue to talk about consciousness really in an infinite way for the rest of our lives. I did love the statement that he made. We are the manifestations of nature's attempt to reflexively comprehend itself. Again, this is, I believe, connected to evolution. We have an ability to think, and we're being called to think at a higher level. I did want to share with you something else. I had an opportunity this week to talk with my son, Andrew, who's 15 in high school, about consciousness, which, really just doesn't show up, those opportunities, every day. And so, he had an assignment in his psychology class to write a paper, and he picked the Zimbardo prison experiment. I'd never heard of this. There was a group of people that were put together by scientists to examine what they would do. They created a scenario and put an experiment, prisoners and guards. They divided the group in half. And so they had thought this experiment, they were just going to observe their behavior. The experiment was supposed to last for 2 weeks. It lasted for 6 days. What happened is, the guards started being abusive and sadistic in that role. And these were common, everyday people. And the inmates were starting to break down. It really was just too much for them. So the summary that came out of this experience was really the thought that if you put any single person into this kind of experiment, that they would respond in the same way. Well, my son, Andrew, said, Mom, I just don't really think that that's true. I can't see that if they put me in the role of being the prison guard that I'm going to be mean to people. And I said, well, I'm glad to hear that. And I thought, so he's like, is this really true? And so it's one of those questions I had to sit and think. I'm like, well, I agree. If I was put in that position of being guard, I don't think I would be mean to people. Certainly wouldn't do that. And then, there's that space of me, when your kids ask questions, there's a space where I went deeper. And I was breathing, I'm like, Andrew, this is about consciousness. Think about other people that have been in prison in our history, that have had a higher consciousness. People like Gandhi, he was in prison many different times fighting for the rights of people in India, wanted liberation from British rule. And one of the times that he was in jail, it was said that he talked his way out of jail. He was at such high consciousness. And not only that, but got help for the other people that were there. So we know that just by being in a place of higher consciousness, if he had been in that prison experience, experiment, I know that the results would have been different. I really believe that he would have changed the energy of all the people in that experiment. And look what he's done. Martin Luther King followed a lot of his nonviolent practices, so not only did he change the energy in India, he changed the energy in the United States. Now that is powerful, high consciousness. So as I close today, I do just want to reflect, and I'm like, thank goodness that my friend Jill, invited me to church so many years ago. I just don't know what my life would have been like if I hadn't stumbled into this way of living. So as you go out into the world today, I really am asking you to look at your own life. And my request for you is to share how you're learning and growing with other people. Find someone this week to share how you're growing in consciousness. Create a conversation. The beautiful thing about that is that it can open conversation. You can connect with someone else. They may want to visit here, which is great. But more important for me is the fact that if you're sharing that, then you're a seed of consciousness that's really creating higher consciousness throughout the rest of the world. And that's what we're all about. So go and spread your higher consciousness gifts. Thank you.